Hey everyone, welcome to Today's Students, Tomorrow's Talent. Our show today is part one of a two-part series focused on college closures. Hundreds of colleges have closed or consolidated in recent years, including public and private, nonprofit, and for-profit schools across the country. In many cases, these closures have been handled well. College leaders responsibly shut down the schools, taking careful steps not to hurt students. But that's not always the case. Sometimes students are left stranded, in debt, with nothing to show for their effort and nowhere to go. This is where we'll start today. My first guest is Unique Johnson, a former student at Virginia College, a for-profit institution operated by Education Corporation of America that recently closed. Also, before we get started, a reminder that as a private foundation, Lumina does not support or oppose any legislation. Lumina provides educational information, nonpartisan research, and analysis to advance Goal 2025. So Unique, thanks for coming in with us today, and I'm really excited to continue our conversation. I was hoping, again, you can kind of go back to the beginning a little bit and start us off where it all started for you back here in Indiana.
Okay. So basically, I was born and raised in Indianapolis. I currently live in Jacksonville, Florida, and I was a high school dropout. So I dropped out at 17 because I became pregnant with my son, who is now 7. And I was going to Indy Met, and right next door is the Excel Center. So the Excel Center is like a GED program. They help with getting your GED and getting you on the right path of graduation. And I was basically explaining to you that I've never experienced walking across the stage. So it was important for me to, go to college so I can just go ahead and get that experience along with my education. And so I fast forward to 2016, I moved to Jacksonville, Florida. And I ended up getting pregnant. And I waited a while before I went to school. So let's fast forward again. But so in 2018, after having my daughter, I decided to sign up for a college named Virginia College. And this was around like March of 2018. So I was a new mom again. So I had already had my daughter. And I decided to sign up for school because I wanted to get back in the nursing field for medical office specialists. So I had signed up for school. I actually started March 19th of 2018. And so everything was going good. I had my set schedule. It worked out for me because the school had the schedule that I needed. So I was going Mondays, Wednesdays, and every other Friday from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. So the schedule, it worked out for me. And I went all the way up into November. I had 1 week of externship left. So after externship, I would have been taking my state exam, and I would have been moving forward with my career. And I had got a phone call. I was at my extern site, and I had got a phone call from a friend saying, "You need to get up to the school now. Um, they're panicking. Basically, the school is shutting down. You need to get your transcripts." And I went up there, and it was no information given to me. It wasn't why is this happening? What can we do to help you out, in the near future or anything like that. I received my transcripts, and I had actually so I found out on a Thursday, and I had until that Monday to go up to the school to get my transcripts because they was officially shutting down on that Monday. And so I did that, and the lady that I talked to, the financial advisor, the one that signed me up for my classes, she told me that she was going to email me and she was going to keep in contact with me as far as, helping me out with this situation because I was, basically I was running a race all the way from March, and I was finally at the finish line, and it seemed like she really wanted to help me, but she never reached out to me. She never sent me an email or called me or anything, um, basically helping me regarding the school shutting down. So now we're here. It's 2019. I'm still, I wouldn't say jobless, but I am careerless. And it's kind of like a bummer because I worked so hard, especially having a newborn baby and taking time out of my life to do something that I finally had the courage to do because, you know, being a single mother at the time, I wanted to make sure that I put my family first, and I finally had a moment where I could finally put myself first and go to school and do something for myself, and it didn't work out in my favor. So,
Well,
yeah.
thank you. I know it's not a pleasant experience to continue to have to tell all the time, and you just finished on something that I want to kind of circle back around to.
Mhm,
You just said that you took time to do this program. You selected this program at Virginia College because they made it available to you in a way that fit your schedule, and you're prioritizing family. And what strikes me a lot is that you're saying, that in addition to all the other things that all the time that you spent in classes and your externship, and I know we'll talk about the money piece in a little bit here, but you just said too that it's about also missing time with your family.
mhm.
And I guess now, yeah, as you've had some time to continue thinking about that, is that one of the things you think about the most? Are you as you kind of reflect on this experience?
Yeah, now that I think about it, it's like moments now where I think about like, okay, these are moments that I missed out with my son and my daughter. Like he had school plays and things like that that I missed out on because I basically wanted to put my education first, which is nothing wrong with that. But if I would have known that this was going to happen, I wouldn't have put all my energy towards it. So I missed out on, some doctor's appointments, some school plays, some football practices, anything, regarding my children.
Mm.
So, yeah.
So you said though you got a transcript, and you never heard back from that advisor. Did you go to another school? I mean, you only had what, like a couple hours left your externship, and then you would have been done. Essentially, you just had to create your go do your testing. Did another school help you out at all?
No, they did. I went to, I don't know if I should put them on
It's
blast,
okay if you
but
don't want to.
yeah. I went to Concord College and they wouldn't accept my credits. It's a college down here. Also, it's a nursing program, and they wouldn't accept my credits. And I also that was probably like the only school that I went to. And I only had 35 hours left. And they basically told me that I would have to do the program all over again. So when I started thinking about that, I was like, heck no. Like, I spent all this time. And then when we get into the financial aspect, am I going to be, paying out this money again? So it's just like, no, I want a better solution to this problem, basically.
And it was only 35 hours of your externship left, right? Like not even credit
Correct.
hours. You already took all your courses.
Mhm.
Did they give you a reason? Did they explain anything why they decided not to take the credit?
Um, I didn't really get an explanation. I just know that a lot of people, so me and my friend had actually went up there and they were basically telling us both the same thing, like you would have to basically start over. And I'm like, why? Like, and I don't know if it's because of the situation with Virginia College, but it just seemed like they was kind of like hesitant to kind of like take on um basically the responsibility of what Virginia College did. So, I mean,
Well,
I didn't really get a good explanation, and I'm kind of like, I'm baffled, really.
yeah, yeah. I think that's the most mild way you could put that. And
Mm.
let's talk a little bit about some of the finance stuff that we've talked about. So I know you took out some student loans to go to Virginia. Is that right?
Mhm. Over 15 grand.
Mm. So what's the status of all that?
I still have to pay it back. So I'm not happy about that. Have I started paying on it? No, because I feel like I've been wronged. Of course, I worked and I did my part in school, but what happened to the promising end? What happened to, updating my resume and getting my resume together and, finding me jobs or sending my resume out or my state exam. I was told that I would have to pay for my state exam out of pocket. All the over $15,000 were included. All that stuff was included in that.
Mm.
So,
And I know
yeah.
you and I talked earlier this week too about forbearance, right? I mean, I know like the
Mhm.
FAFSA program, the Department of Ed, they have a thing that if your college closes and you're stuck in a position that you're in, that you can apply for forbearance or forgiveness or deferment or a variety of options. Did you get any advice on that? Are you doing that?
Like I told you, I had received a card in the mail, and I had did like the application to go ahead and go with that progress or whatnot. And like I told you, like it's so many people calling me. It's just like, I would like it's almost like I feel as if that it's a scam because, so many people saying, oh, well, we're forgiveness loans and things like that. And it's just like, how do I actually know that I'm talking to someone who is going to help me, with this financial situation?
I mean,
So.
are the people calling like identifying themselves and saying, "Hey, I'm from the U.S. Department of Education," or
No, they're not saying that. They're basically just saying, "Oh, well, we know that you went to Virginia College and you are in debt and stuff like that." And I'm like, okay, I know I'm in debt. You're telling me something that I already know or whatnot. But, don't tell me something I know. Tell me what I would like to hear.
Mm,
So once we get deep into the conversation and I'm not hearing, a solution, then I pretty much just hang up.
yeah. Well, I asked you too the other day when we were chatting about, what kind of advice you would give to, fellow students, or to, to someone who can change the system. I mean, you have a great perspective.
Um, The advice that I know that I told you were basically like just doing research more about the program. I know that the rumor for Virginia College, and I don't know about Brightwood back in Indianapolis, but it had a lot to do with funding. And I want to know like why you had to know. It couldn't have been like a blindsided situation to where, it was just kind of like, oh, well, funding's out, you know, we have to close the school. You guys had to know that it was leading up to that point and you still accepted students. So for someone that's in my position or heading into college, I would say that it's just really all about research. Know what you're getting yourself into. Just have multiple options and things like that. And as far as somebody that can help, um, it has to be better because, like I told you, we have the new generations that's coming up, and you never know what they're going through. And I told you that it was an older lady that was in her 50s in my classroom who just had the courage to, finally get a college degree or whatever she's going for. And it's very sad that she had the courage to do it, and then it didn't, fall into place.
Um, I get one of the things I guess I'm curious about too, Unique, is I know you went to another college to see if they would take some of your credit, but I also have to imagine, you talked earlier about just being missing out on some things with your family and with your kids, and I know there's another little one on the way, due date pretty soon, which is exciting. Congrats.
Mhm.
Are you is going back to school, in your future? You started our conversation by saying, when you left Indianapolis and you left the Goodwill Excel Center, you wanted to make sure you walked across the stage. I got to imagine that ambition hasn't gone away,
Yeah.
but that the calculus may have changed.
Yeah. So now with the situation that I'm in now, with having another child, I'm basically dedicated to my children. I want to make sure they're getting the proper education that they're receiving. So, right now, schooling is on hold, but I do have hopes of going back. Like I told you before, I love being in the nursing field. I did my CNAs. I wanted to do my medical office specialist, but unfortunately, the school shut down. Now I'm trying to, eventually I'll get into forensics and but yeah, I missed out on moments, and it's very hurtful because I finally had got to a point to where I was just like, yes, I was so happy to be just even imagine myself, like picture myself walking across the stage. I wanted to do it with my babies, my kids, my children. I wanted to do it with them because they helped me in this moment. They motivated me the most to get back into college and to basically gain a career for myself. They gave me that confidence and that courage. So I definitely will be getting back into it. I haven't given up. So yeah.
Well, great. I don't even know what to say. I'm so glad to, I'm constantly amazed, Unique, and that you can have that spirit after so many systems have really burned you on this. And I'm hoping that some folks who are listening can help us figure out a way to not only support you and the tens of thousands of students who are in a similar position, and also prevent it from happening again.
Yeah. I do want to say that I thank you for this opportunity because, like I told you before, I'm used to speaking out against, things that are happening in our community that, basically nobody has the courage to speak on. A lot of people just think like, oh, well, it happened to me, we'll just let it go. Like, no, we're tired of things happening to us, and it's no solution because we do have hardworking people out here that want better for themselves
When you
and
say
not to
that,
be another statistics, basically.
who is the to us?
I would say the predominantly Black neighborhood. I feel as if that my personal opinion, I feel as if that they put a lot of the community colleges in our neighborhood, and then something like this happen. It's like a lose-lose situation. Not only do we don't have the proper education, we also are ended up in debt. Also,
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I'm really thankful that you came on the show today, Unique, and I'm really inspired by you being willing to share your story and continuing to tell your story. And I hope that we can get out there far and wide. And on a personal note, I hope that you and I can stay in touch. And I'm super eager to figure out if you have a boy or a girl in May. And wishing you all the best.
yes, I would definitely keep in touch with you. I enjoyed this. I enjoyed having a conversation with you, and I just thank you for reaching out because it just lets me know that you're someone who listens and you're trying to do something on your end. Also, you're trying to get the word out.
Well, there's a lot of folks right on your side. Sometimes it's hard to see them, but I know they're there, and hopefully we can do something together. Well, thanks, Unique. Have a great rest of the day. I know I've taken up so much of your time today, so I really appreciate you coming on.
All right, thank you.
All right. We'll see you later.
All right, thanks.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm joined now by Scott Jasic, co-founder and editor at Insight Higher Ed. Scott, thanks for talking with me today. I'm really glad we had a chance to sit down together.
It's great to be here.
So, Scott, we just heard from Unique about her experience at Virginia College and down in Florida, and it really is, I think, a pretty powerful story, and one that gives me a lot of questions. And so, as someone who's been reporting on this a bit, can you talk to me about where it started for you, or where you think we should begin?
Sure. Well, periodically, of course, throughout American history, some colleges have closed. What is striking right now is that we're in a period of two kinds of closures, of which she is one representative example. We're seeing a bunch of large for-profit institutions fold, and while many of the students think of themselves as just being at one campus that may not be huge, they are generally part of large chains where lots of people are having their educations disrupted. And then at the same time, we've been seeing closures of some small private colleges on a much smaller scale, but obviously also very upsetting to the students who are enrolled there and alumni and others who care about the institutions.
So why? I think there's probably a lot of folks who feel that we've been hearing more about college closures happening lately, and that may or may not be right. So can you give us a sense of either some trends and maybe explain a little bit about why some of these colleges are closing and help us understand the difference between why those two types are?
Sure. So starting on the for-profit, the large institutions, for-profits in the United States generally go through sort of a roller coaster. I don't mean individual ones, but the sector as a whole. And so there are periods of relative strength and then periods of relative weakness. We are now in a period where, because of tighter regulation by accreditors, by the education department, and by state governments, we are seeing more colleges lose easy access to federal aid. While for-profits are private private businesses, the reality is almost all of them, and certainly all of those that have been going under, are totally dependent on the aid that their students receive from the federal government. So, and that is both aid and loans. So if that money is either halted in some cases or slowed down, has been the case in others, in many cases, institutions just do not have the financial wherewithal to function. And there, what you're seeing, which is why you have so many ex-students in trouble, is you're seeing some very sudden collapses where literally students will show up to their campus and there's a sign on the door saying we're closed. That is not the way it's supposed to happen, but that's been happening a lot lately. And so you have this very sudden shift. Now, at the small nonprofits that are closing, you actually see more of a process that plays out typically over years. You see colleges that are in parts of the country where they have a hard time attracting new students, or a hard time attracting students who will pay enough of tuition to make the institution work financially. Many, but not all of the colleges there that have gotten in trouble are in New England, which is seeing a shrinking population base, and many of them were small to start with. Many of the colleges in trouble had under 1,000 enrollment. It is very hard to make a college work on a very small scale. So these are colleges that were vulnerable for some time. In some ways, it's a miracle some of them survived as long as they have. One of the things that I think is really important to understand, and this is in both groups of colleges, there are really motivated, committed students, and there are also really motivated faculty members at both types of institutions. And so these closures do not necessarily mean that everyone who is enrolled there or everyone who's teaching there somehow flawed. But these are groups of students I really worry about, particularly those at the for-profits.
And building off that, I guess I'm also curious, in addition to the for-profits, what else are you concerned about? We know HBCUs, for example, are a particular risk, and some of your reporting has covered that.
Sure. And so if you look at, say, Bennett College in North Carolina, recently lost its accreditation. It's appealing, so it's still functioning, but a college that loses accreditation loses eligibility for federal student aid. I worry a lot about the students at Bennett. Bennett is for women, and so you're talking about generally low-income African-American women. We as a society need more low-income African-American women to get a good education and to get ahead in life with careers. I worry that colleges aren't lining up to recruit these students if Bennett goes under.
So you talked earlier about one of the reasons why some of this is happening, in addition to demographic shifts, is that there's been some tightening regulation from accreditors, from state agencies, et cetera. I'm also, the more and more I'm talking to folks like you, I guess I am just still curious, though, about what are some potential solutions to doing this, and it could be solutions to either how do we support colleges properly. Of course. One could probably say, listen, all colleges operate as a business, and sometimes businesses close. And so is a solution need to be packed around supporting colleges better, and or what is the solution to make sure that when a college has to close, that it's done so responsibly?
So there's a really interesting debate going on about this, and actually Massachusetts is an interesting place to look. They are considering legislation there that would basically require colleges to be upfront about it if they're not sure they can survive a year. Now, the idea here is consumer protection, so that students who are enrolling or thinking of enrolling can make an informed decision on the risk level that they will face. The flip side of this, and the reason colleges hate it, is there are few things that would better discourage students from enrolling than being told a college is at risk. So the honesty in terms of consumer protection may doom some of these colleges. The flip side of that, though, is that without that, students can't make informed choices. Likewise, there can be protections that involve requiring colleges to have teach-out systems in place. Under a teach-out, if a college closes, it has agreements with other colleges who will teach the remaining courses needed by the students who are enrolled. This requires work in advance. It's not something you can just snap your fingers and step up, particularly if, say, you're a college with multiple professional or health professions degrees. You need your students to earn the remaining credits at accredited programs. This takes work to set up. Again, some colleges are doing this better than others.
Yeah, to what extent, on the topic of those teach-out plans, to what extent is that required by regulation or legislation or policy? I mean, I've heard some cases where they had a teach-out plan on paper, but when a student goes to that receiving institution, that institution says, we never even heard about this plan.
Yes. The requirements are for real teach-out plans, not fantasy teach-out plans, because, in that situation, and again, imagine that situation, students go into the institution, their home institution no longer exists. This is a disaster. Now, this is why we're seeing in the nonprofit sector, places like Green Mountain announced that they were going to close a whole semester in advance. So while they're having a very tough time in their final semester, they are devoting that to firming up these teach-out plans, helping students plan for a smooth transition, and so forth. No one wants to be forced to switch colleges, but there are humane ways to do so. They cost money to set up. I mean, professionals have to do this. And they require a degree of honesty. Mm-hmm. Somebody at Green Mountain might have said, oh, let's just try to hold it together and see what happens. Well, they made, I would argue, a appropriate decision to be honest about where they were so that their students and their faculty could focus on teach-outs.
Yeah, I mean, we heard the same thing. We had, in preparation for the show, we had a good number of students that we talked to and faculty from St. Joe's here in Indiana, yes, and their partnership with Marion. And, Marion locked tuition at St. Joe's rates, made sure every program mapped. And so I do think, to your point, there are some good examples out there. And I guess, we're just going to have to continue to explore about how to make those not the exception, but the rule.
Yeah, now the good thing there is you had two Indiana institutions with some common values and educational programming. Yeah. Not 100%, but some in common. And so I think there was a real commitment to work together. It is more difficult for some of the colleges that have gotten in trouble are in remote areas and may be highly specialized. But when Green Mountain, which specializes in environmental education, announced it was closing, not only did it have a teach-out in place, but other colleges stepped up and said, hey, we're willing to work with your students. The more challenging thing, I think, is for those at for-profit higher education. Those who are enrolled at a nonprofit private college are of a range of socioeconomic backgrounds, but they're probably paying something in tuition. And so even though a Marion makes a sacrifice by locking in tuition rates, they are dealing with students who have some access to funds in some ways. In some of the cases of the students who I have heard about who have been shut out of for-profits that have closed. They are maxed out on what they can or want to borrow. They may not have credits that transfer. They're I think, generally in a much more tenuous situation.
Mm. So setting aside students for just a moment here and thinking about higher ed as an industry, I guess I'm just curious to get your perspective of, does this matter? And should the industry be concerned about this many institutions closing in this span of time? I've certainly talked to a couple of futurists who say, they expect, based on demographic shifts and all these other shifts, that a third of institutions or half of institutions, and so it doesn't matter to the industry.
I tend to think that they overstate the case. Clay Christensen, Harvard Business School professor, is famous for that projection that you just noted. I think more will close, and there's no doubt that more are closing now than have closed in recent years. But one thing to remember is every closure helps another college or two. When one environmentally oriented small private college closes, guess what? There are a few others that could stand to grow. So ironically, the tragedy for those who are associated with one college may help another, which doesn't mean we're not going to see more closures, but I think it is worth remembering that some may get stronger. The other thing to consider is that many colleges will be in trouble if they go on just recruiting the same kinds of students they've always recruited, just offering the same kinds of programs they've always offered. That isn't a necessity, though. Many colleges have said, hey, we see the market shifting. We're moving into serving non-traditional adult students or online students or students from a different part of the country. So the only group that may be in real trouble is if their particular market is fading and they are intent on not making any changes.
Well, Scott, I really appreciate all the reporting you and your colleagues at Inside Higher Ed have been doing on this. I know I read quite a number of pieces that you all put together. So I wish you all the luck and continue to follow the story. I know we'll follow your pieces along. And thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Have a good one. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. My next guest is Senator J.D. Ford of Indiana's 29th District. Senator Ford authored Senate Bill 345, which would require for-profit post-secondary institutions to pay an annual fee to establish a student reimbursement fund. The fund would reimburse students, among other things, if the institution closes before the student completes their course of study. Senator Ford, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. So just start us out. Talk to us about what Senate Bill 345 is.
Yeah, so for me, we had seen some students impacted by this through some media reports here just in the city of Indianapolis. But this kind of popped up on my radar. I worked in higher education before I came to the Senate, and there was an article in The Atlantic a while back kind of talking about, these for-profit schools and how much money that they're making off of students. I mean, this really has been a multi-billion-dollar industry. And started really kind of researching it, looking into it, and noticed that some of the practices that they do is very predatory, and we can kind of talk about that. But and then I came in, got elected in November, saw some media reports. Also in October of last year, we learned that the Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, was going to start rolling back some of the Obama regulations that he had put in place, because he had also recognized that this was kind of going down the wrong path. And then, again, the media reports here, so that really kind of prompted me to file Senate Bill 345 in the hopes that some of these students would really kind of have some sort of recourse should they, their school that they're attending closes up shop. I mean, can you imagine going to school, walking up to the door, lights are off, signs on the window, and you're 1 week away from, ready to be graduating or getting a certificate or whatever the case may be. And then feeling so hopeless, right? Having all the time, energy, and effort that you've put into it, all the money that you put into it, and to have nothing to show for it. So that's really why we filed the legislation.
I know that as I read the synopsis of the bill, it talks about establishing a fund.
That's right.
That the for-profit institutions would have to pay into. Can you unpack a little bit about? I mean, I know it's still in the early stages, but just what the vision might be of how this might technically work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that the for-profit schools, do not necessarily play a role, right? All I'm saying is that we need to have them regulated in the sense that if you want to do business in our state, fine. But we want you to register with the Commission for Higher Education. We want you to put like a down payment down, if you will. If your doors close and you decide to cease operations here in our state. And part of that money that they would pay into, because this is what this bill would do, is create a fund for that down payment. They would then, the students that were affected would then be able to go back to the Commission for Higher Education and get some sort of money back, right? We're not saying that they're going to get all of the money back, but they should be able to at least recoup some of their losses.
As you noted, certainly students here in Indianapolis and in Indiana broadly have been impacted, but we also know this is a national issue. And so I was curious, you've referenced seeing some things out in the media and, of course, some sources in Atlantic. Did you look to other states at all in considering this bill, or are there other states that you look to as potential models?
We really didn't get a chance to look at what other states are doing, simply because, I just knew that, there were students that were impacted here in our state. And so as a member of the General Assembly, we get to work with the Legislative Services Agency, which is a nonprofit agency that drafts all of our bills. So thankfully, I don't have to do any of the bill drafting. And they're much smarter than I am. So we asked them to take a look at this. We asked them to research this issue. We asked them to draft this bill that would create those parameters, those guardrails, if you will. And the final product was Senate Bill 345. So I know that that's happening in other states, right? But if anything, I want Indiana to lead the way, and I want Indiana to be known as a state that protects its consumers, being the students. So that's again why we decided to file 345.
And I guess that's one of my other questions. Is I was reading through the bill and talking with a number of students that we have in preparation for putting together this show. I guess I'm curious as to whether you might think that the bill should go further. One of the challenges, in addition to the financial challenges that students face, the debt that they're stuck with after an institution closes, is occasionally, a lot of times, the learning that has been acquired doesn't actually transfer other places.
Yeah.
And when it does transfer, there's rarely uniformity to it. There's a lot of discretion given to the host institution, the receiving institution. And so do you think there's a spot, that a role that the legislature should be playing in ensuring that institutions that are authorized by the state, that the learning should actually count elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, we are going to have to take on these students, right? I mean, if these for-profit schools are closing and their credits don't transfer or they just feel helpless, where are they going to go, right, to complete their schooling? And so yeah, I think the state should play a role here. And if anything, we've asked students to contact our office to help them navigate the ways of, what they can do. Again, I just think it's sad that, they have gone through, their schooling and they get down to the final weeks before they're ready to graduate and they get nothing from this, So I definitely think that we should, have a say in this. And I think that say again is Senate Bill 345. Unfortunately, it didn't get a hearing this session. But I'm hoping to, work with my colleagues in the future sessions to see if we can't try and at least get it a hearing to at least start the debate, in our state. And I think it's important to know that, this has been years in the making, right? And again, I think one report that I read was, a $32 billion industry. And some of these for-profit schools, they're taking money away from, other students as well. And so there needs to be just a little bit more accountability with them.
So we've mentioned a couple times about the size of the industry. I mean, we also know that the vast majority of funds that support for-profit institutions are from federal student aid, in particular via loans. But we've also talked in our conversation so far about some of the roles that the state has to play. And so clearly this is a multifaceted issue between state and federal. Certainly have a role to play. You also mentioned before about being, my words, concerned perhaps about Secretary DeVos's decision to roll back some of the Obama era regulations and rules. So as you think about the intersection between what the state's role is and what the federal role is in all of this, how do you help us think through that? And what would be your advice to folks out there who are wanting to create change?
Yeah, I think, with Secretary DeVos, it's been kind of interesting to see, how she works and what her priorities are. And, and I think that what we've seen with some of these students who've gone through this experience and not necessarily had a great experience on top of the Obama regulations, and there's the additional scrutiny that the media has on these for-profit schools, I think it really has kind of led them to kind of be in disarray until they had the champion of Secretary DeVos to come back in and kind of reboot the industry, right? And so, and again, that's her prerogative. I don't agree with it. I think if that's the case, and if we're getting the reboot of the industry, which is what I'm currently seeing, then I think it's my job, my prerogative, to make sure that those students are protected, those consumers are protected. And again, I think that's where the state plays the role. I have spoken with former staff members who have worked at these institutions, and one staff member told me that it was cold calling every single day. Just get a student on the phone, right? And so that this is a big industry. That that there's some predatory practices. I'm not saying that was a predatory practice, but I feel like when you just have this mentality of just getting students through the door, just get them in here, and it's really easy to do that. Once you get a student in, then you can start drawing down those federal funds. And again, those funds make up a quarter of the total funds from the Department of Education. So I just want to make sure that those funds are being used in a right and proper way. Yeah, I would say that if there are people that are watching today that have been impacted or know somebody who is impacted, which you don't have to look very far. There are people that have been impacted. To contact our office, the best way to get a hold of us is our email account, which is s29@iga.in.gov. That's our Senate email account. And what we'd like to do is start collecting stories and working with students to best help them kind of navigate this process. I mean, it's not easy, right? You already feel helpless as it is. And so I think it's my job as a state senator to help those folks navigate this process. And whatever I can do to assist them and help get them some sort of a solution, my office is happy to do that.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing a little bit about the work you're doing.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
You bet. My thanks to our guests for coming on the show. And again, a reminder that as a private foundation, Lumina does not support or oppose any legislation. I also want to thank the many students, faculty, and other experts that shared their thoughts and experience with me in preparation for this show. Many saw my posts on social media and connected with me with folks or shared your own stories. Just want to say thank you so much for all your help. Before we go, I want to share that the more and more I dig into college closures, the more and more I realize how messed up it all is. Yes, in many cases, colleges have been able to make the best out of a bad situation. They put the students first, go out about the hard work of shutting down a school. But, and what bothers me the most, is that from all the reading I've been doing and all the conversations I've been having, I've learned that the reason some colleges do this well is because individual people, faculty members, students, administrators, tapped into their own morality and made good choices. And while I'm so glad those people are in our world, particularly in the education world, relying on people's individual definition of morality is unreliable at best. Out of the intractable problems our society faces, I don't think that closing a college in a responsible way is one of them. This should be easy, painful, emotional, but responsible. So if you've been impacted by a college closure in some way, I do want to hear from you. We're going to try something new out, and I don't know exactly where this will go, but I know the first step is to really hear from you. So again, if you've been impacted by a college closure in some way, grab your phone or device and take a short video of yourself telling me your story, and then send it to me. My email address is dpulicki@luminafoundation.org. It's on the screen for those watching and in the show notes for those listening. And finally, please join us in 2 weeks when we continue this conversation. We'll be talking to some administrators who have been on the other end of this equation, and also learning more about accreditation and authorization. There's still a lot to dig into, and I know we're not going to be able to get to everything, but please do join us in 2 weeks for our next show, our second part of the series. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.